Hello, and welcome to Ask an Archaeologist. I'm Paul Duncan McGarrett.
Podcast with me, Paul Duncan McGarrett, and I am being very quiet because I've just put the boy down. He's in the next room. He's not quite asleep yet, though you might hear some babbling in the background. But I just wanted to introduce the podcast very quickly. This is an interview with Archey Fantasies, who is on many a podcast. He's very active on Twitter and in digital archaeology. We have a very interesting conversation about pseudo-archaeology, but also we get on a little bit to cover something that has been on my mind for a very long time, which is we end up discussing some of the difficulties that we have come across in trying to have a career in archaeology and some of the stumbling blocks for us. I think these are problems, these are questions that come up with a lot of people who have been in particularly things like commercial archaeology for a very long time. It's probably something that might, look at that, couch those words as hard as I can, couch them good. It's definitely going to be something that I come back to in future episodes because it is something that is on my mind. I said it quite succinctly on a tweet recently, which was, I love archaeology. I find it very, very easy to talk about archaeology enthusiastically, but I struggle to advocate for people to pursue a career in archaeology because whilst I love the discipline, I love what we talk about, I love the potential within the discipline. The job itself has damn near broken me on more than one occasion. And we touch on that a little bit. And I hope you find it interesting. I hope you find it revelatory or reflective of your own positions. And if you disagree, I'd love to hear from you. I really would. So drop me a line on Twitter. That's always the best way of getting hold of us. And until next time, enjoy the podcast, enjoy the interview, and I'll catch you around. Bye-bye.
Hello, and I'm joined by the host and presenter of Archey Fantasies. How are you doing?
I'm great. How are you?
Yeah, is that how I shouldn't refer to you as Archey Fantasies? Is that the nom de guerre we've gone for?
Yeah, I've kind of branded myself as Archey Fantasies at this point, or people call me Archie sometimes, which I think is why they think I'm male. But the podcast itself is named Archaeological Fantasies. It's named after a not very well-known book that was launched. I want to say it was Garrett Fagan published it. He edited the volume. It's a really great book. People should go read it. It was probably one of the first massive calls to action that the archaeology community needs to get involved with debunking pseudo-archaeology in mass and not just, writing articles about how we don't like it, but we just don't have time.
It seems to be like... We'll get into all of this, obviously, but because otherwise, what's the point of having people on if you're not going to talk about the main thing that they do?
And show's over. Great.
Yeah. So that's grand. Thank you so much for coming. I can go home, Ellie. No. Do you think it's something that is...
Right.
Do you think pseudo-archaeology is the debunking of it is becoming more a part of what an archaeologist's job is, or is it just that we're starting to accept that part of our role?
I think it's more the latter. I don't think people are I think it depends on what group you're in.
Mm.
If you get on the internet, you'll find a lot of internet archaeologists who are involved in social media and awareness and that kind of stuff. And so you'll find debunking happening there for a variety of reasons. If you hang out in just like regular old academia or just hang out with regular old field techs, a lot of them are not involved with social media because they have lives. And, you know, they either don't interact with people who believe in pseudo-archaeology very often, or they've written it off and they just don't want to deal with it. I do know the people who I know who teach are teaching it more as part of their base classes, because Ancient Aliens has been on the air for 16 seasons now.
This is a TV program on Discovery Channel, isn't it?
Yeah. But I mean, you have people who literally grew up watching this show who are now going into college and who are now taking their introductory classes to archaeology, who they grew up on this. So, so you've got to address this in class now, because you've got people who have been taught that the pyramids are alien battery generators, and that, what's the new one? Crap, I just watched an episode the other day of a site that I don't know anything about, but apparently like the aliens made the basalt columns float and built log cabin like structures out of basalt, which is actually really cool. The site's amazing. I wish I could remember the name of it, but there's absolutely no reason to think it was aliens.
No. So you've given one example though, the sort of this ancient alien thing that comes around, but how do you define pseudo-archaeology?
You know, pseudo-archaeology for me has actually kind of changed a little since I started doing this. Originally, when I started doing the podcast, when I started doing the blog 10 years ago, it was pretty much anything that wasn't accurate archaeology, or just like really out there fringe ideas. Like, it's not just aliens usually. I mean, there's people that believe that humans lived with dinosaurs. There's people that believe that like the Earth isn't as old as we say it is. There's people that believe there's people that live in the center of the planet still. I mean, there's all kinds of crazy beliefs out there. And really the only time I started defining it as pseudo-archaeology was anytime somebody was taking one of those beliefs and trying to use archaeology to support it. And now that I've been doing it for so long, and with shows like Ancient Aliens and Monster Hunters and Expedition Unknown and all of these television shows that people watch, pseudo-archaeology kind of takes on a different meaning now. It's more willful. I feel like people are knowingly using archaeology incorrectly to push a bias or to push an idea. You're not going to convince me that the guys on Ancient Aliens, like all of them, truly believe what they're saying at this point, because they have too many contradictory opinions that they put out there and stories that they put out there. And it's just like, you guys don't actually believe what you're saying, but the show brings you a lot of money, so you're just going to keep pushing it. But to do that, they have to use archaeology incorrectly and attack mainstream archaeology in order to keep eyeballs on their show.
It's interesting, but why do you feel we need to address these problems? Why can't we just let people have their sort of their fun imagined worlds? Why is it important that we challenge pseudo-archaeology?
I'm not trying to destroy people's fun worlds. I mean, I like role playing games. I like video games. I like a good movie. I like horror novels. I mean, and all of that ties back to archaeology at some point. So, I mean, I understand entertainment. I do, because I participate. My problem is
you're not denying books.
I'm not. Books are real. They exist. I have a few.
I've seen a Star Wars. How dare you?
Star Wars. Oh, that's a whole thing. What I have noticed, and this is a personal observation, is that the people that believe in things, like truly believe that aliens are like the parent culture of all culture on the planet, have other overlapping beliefs that are not necessarily desirable, in my opinion. And it's a commonality that's shared. I think pseudo-archaeology is a symptom of a greater problem. And I think I can't solve the larger problem, which is society in general, but I can kind of chip away at the one little thing, which is archaeology. I know archaeology. It's my field. It's what I do. So I feel like it's important that people understand the difference between somebody trying to sell you a fantasy as fact and somebody trying to tell you a fun story so that you're entertained for an hour and a half, you know? You can go and watch a fun movie about Indiana Jones or whatever the new archaeology these days. And
We
you
do
can
need
enjoy
a new
it.
one. We need a new one, actually, to be
He's
honest.
making one.
No, not a new Indiana Jones. We need a new person. Indiana Jones is a busted flush.
Yeah, he needs to. I mean, love, truly, but stop.
Oh,
Now.
yeah.
Stop
God.
before you truly break something.
Well, this is it, right? It's always been the fun of watching the knockabout stunts, but now I'm just like, there's an old man about to shatter.
I know, right? It's like, why are you in that fridge? It's just you're too old for this, man. Stop. You broke your ankle getting onto a set. Stop.
There isn't a single age at which getting in the fridge is appropriate.
I mean, but
How old
we
are
all
you?
know-
16? Get in the fridge.
Okay. Totally acceptable. Anyway. Yeah, but that's just the difference. I part of debunking pseudo-archaeology is teaching critical thinking. And I think, at least with my generation and the generation immediately after me, I think that was lacking severely with our education. I don't know anything about the rest of the generations because I don't have kids, so I have no idea what they're being taught in schools these days.
My 1-year-old's an idiot, don't worry.
Well, I would hope.
He's got no critical thinking. He keeps running into walls over and over again.
Putting stuff in his mouth. I am so sorry.
It's all right. I want to talk more about how you think archaeology, sort of the academic side of things and the commercial side of things, how the way that they conduct their work, how that helps or hinders the way that we combat pseudo-archaeology. But first, that's coming way down the line. First, I'd like to know how you got started in archaeology and what it was that made you want to be involved in the industry in the first place.
When it's both silly and stupid. When I was senior in high school, we had to write a "What do I want to be when I grow up" article, and I didn't want to do it. So in my school, they had like these books. They were like encyclopedias of the jobs you could do in life. And I opened it to the first page, and anthropologist was there. And I was like, I'm just going to write about the first thing I see. And so I did.
You're so lucky it didn't have aardvark handler.
I don't know, man. I might be making more money. So that's why I even found out that it existed. Later, when I actually went into college, I really wanted to do crime scene investigation, and I wanted to do crime scene science. But the college I went to didn't have a course in that, but they did have archaeology, which is very similar methodologically. And so they talked me into doing archaeology instead. And once I was in the program, I was stuck. So I was just like, all right, fine, we'll finish this out. And then, I like it. By the time I graduated, I figured out what CRM was. I realized I didn't have to go academic if I didn't want to.
Sorry, just for clarity, what is CRM?
Oh, sorry. So CRM stands for Cultural Resource Management. When it comes to what I do with archaeology, it's basically a company will hire me as a temporary contract worker to come out and perform archaeological surveys on an area that they're working on developing. So if a company wants to build a new building or a new road needs to go in or a pipeline needs to go through, there's a law here in the States called Section 106 that requires any development to basically be surveyed for a variety of things. And one of them is archaeology, to make sure that there's no historical or prehistoric, I lost my words, things that might get destroyed if somebody builds something there. So it's a preservation law.
So what sort of areas do you work in? Do you have to travel across the whole US, or are you based in a specific area?
I can travel if I want to. There's jobs all over the U.S. The furthest west I've worked is the Midwest. I almost worked in Louisiana, but I dodged that bullet. So I am mainly just so close. But I'm mostly from the Midwest to the East Coast is where I work, and from north to south there. So my area that I can work in is pretty wide. I don't like to travel past the Midwest just because it's so far away.
Yeah. Just out of curiosity then, outside of the way that you have chosen to debunk pseudo-archaeology, how political do you think the work that you do on a day-to-day basis is?
Right. Archaeology itself, I think, is an incredibly political field, just inherently. Pseudo-archaeology, I do believe, is incredibly political as well. I choose to kind of go at things with a political talk because I've noticed a lot of people shut down when they start hearing anything that they consider political popping up. But I mean, you can't say in today's society that something isn't political because it is. Everything's political these days. The makeup I put on this morning was political, so.
Well, have you had any experience of that? Like, I'm just thinking about in the UK, there are obviously, we are also attached to commercial activities. Mm-hmm. The work that I do, a lot of archaeology is attached to commercial activities, and there are these sites that are sort of controversial, and the archaeology forms kind of the softer face of those things. Mm-hmm. Is there from the kind of sites that you're investigating in the United States, are there any extra layers of political consideration that you're having to take in, other than just environmental elements, other historical precedents, other things like that affect how you do your job?
Well, the United States has, I don't know how you guys do it over there, but the United States has a history of both slavery and...
Oh, no, we do that over here.
Yeah. And the pushing off.
We got real good at it.
Yeah, we learned from you guys. Thanks for that.
Oh, God.
But we also have... I was wondering when that was going to start. We also have living native populations that when we got here, we decided we needed to relocate them because they had all the nice stuff. So when we are doing archaeological sites, especially with the CRM projects, we have to take those kinds of things into consideration. Like, we take the historical aspects of the sites into consideration anyway. It's archaeology is what we do. But for example, the most recent pipeline, was it the Dakota? The Dakota water access line. It's got an acronym that I can't think of right off the top of my head. Anyway, it was going through, I think it got approved and did go through some sacred lands for the tribes out there. And there was a huge protest. I mean, it was a massive protest. I don't know how much international press it got, but here in the States, it was a pretty big deal. So yeah, that kind of archaeology was involved in that because it was the archaeologists. I wasn't involved with that one, but I followed the story. There was an archaeological survey, several of them that were performed along the line where the pipeline was going to go in. And one of the reasons we do these surveys is to go out and see if there's anything there. And I mean, I like to think of it as like the last line of defense. You know, if we go out there and we find stuff, it's up to us to make the argument that this area should be avoided, or some kind of preservation needs to occur. The problem that happens with when you're going across Native American lands or tribal lands is the United States also recognizes federally recognized tribes as sovereign governments. So there's this weird overlap. So when you've got, and I'm not an expert in this, so this is just my outside experience. When you have a project that's going across tribal land, you're supposed to get the permission of the tribes who own that land as to if you can do that. When it's stuff like pipelines, because they're considered greater good projects,
With
it can
big
be
air quotes over that for the podcast listeners.
we didn't need the pipeline. The government can step in and basically nix the sovereignty. And that's effectively what happened. I'm not 100% sure. I'm pretty sure they got permission to continue the pipeline, but then something happened and it had to get shut down. And one of the major issues that the tribes were having with that particular pipeline was that it was an oil or gas pipeline, and it was going through some of their water reserves. So, I mean, I can't imagine why people might be uppity about the fact that you want to put toxic water.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I mean, we do have layers here that happen. With the history of slavery here, we come across slave cemeteries and freemen cemeteries a lot, or we'll come across sites that we can identify, or we try to identify as early African American sites. And there's been a real big push to preserve those sites because we didn't do a great job of it in the past. And then, of course, recently we've been having the arguments over statues and statuary, and should certain things be preserved, and should certain things be torn down, and should they be replaced? Should they be remembered? There's a lot of levels to that debate. So
yeah, you surely must have seen the crowds in Bristol recently.
Yeah. I was actually talking to somebody else about that, about dunking the guy in the Thames.
No, he went into the sea.
Oh, did he? Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't realize they drug him all the way to the sea.
No, Bristol's a port town, so a port city. So it was a short jaunt for them all to just drag him down.
I was going to say that would take a while here in the States. We could,
yeah.
bit more land for us.
That's more of a thing. Like, you start picking up people, it turns into a parade. Yeah.
I wouldn't be against it. Just saying it would take a little longer.
Yeah. So the reason I asked about all of these background considerations, all of the things that you're having to deal with just in a day-to-day basis, is because it's interesting to see that these important topics exist. And then pseudoarchaeology comes and brings a whole new layer of made-up nonsense.
It's really interesting, though, because pseudoarchaeology doesn't bring anything new to the table. That's what's really interesting about it. Pseudoarchaeology depends very heavily on incredibly old ideas from the Victorian and the pre-Victorian era that they just keep rehashing. Like, pseudoarchaeology hasn't added anything new to their theory toolbox since they started. Von Daniken basically plagiarized from Morning of the Magicians, which kind of plagiarized from H.P. Lovecraft, which, it's a whole thing. Oh yeah, I told you.
I can't believe we got to Lovecraft.
Oh, we can go farther. Well, can we? I don't think I can, but I know people who can.
No, look, I think I'm happy with the ancient space squid racist.
I mean, but it's that kind of stuff. It's just nothing has changed. They just keep repeating the same ideas over and over again. They're bad ideas. At some point, well, I mean, with the exception of squid people, at some point, a lot of these ideas in archaeology were accepted. And they were pushed by what would have been called mainstream archaeologists at the time, because, as a lot of people have pointed out, archaeology is inherently racist, and it was basically built to. It was a field that developed because white people needed to prove that they were superior, and to do that, they went and studied other not white races and started classifying everyone. We talk about this when we talk about the display of human remains, especially here in the States, because, and this is an argument I get into with people from across the pond, the display of human remains is almost always individuals who are non-white, and very few of them have given permission for the remains to be displayed. And so it's not only a matter of, again, the political power being displayed by I can display your ancestors willy-nilly, and you can't do anything about it. And the whole just, look at the stuff that I have kind of thing. I don't know. It's, like I said, everything about it's political. The saving grace of archaeology is that at some point people realized that this wasn't cool and have since been trying to fix it to varying degrees. I mean, I just had this discussion with somebody earlier, and it's just like, it's not perfect. Like NAGPRA, we have a NAGPRA law, which is the Native Americans Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. I'm pretty sure I butchered it yet again. But it's basically a law that we have that protects Native American graves and also their sacred objects. And it's one of the few laws that we have on the books here that is specifically for human rights of people within the country. So it's not perfect. It's got a lot of problems in it. It's barely a stopgap. It could be better. Same thing with archaeology. Like the fixes that we throw into archaeology aren't great. They're not perfect, but they're better. And I think as a field, if we want to continue to exist, we're going to have to continue to improve, because otherwise people are going to get tired of our shit. So I think I went off on a rant. I apologize.
No. I believe that's what's called doing a podcast.
I am so sorry about that. God. I need to put a rubber band on my wrist so I can snap myself.
It's all right.
It's not. I'm trying really hard not to do that. So sorry.
It's delightful to see the internal anguish of, I'm passionate. My passion has 4 letters.
It's true though. Anyway,
what made you do the podcast, obviously, but it started as a blog. What made you want to start doing the blog in the first place?
I used to be really active with the skeptics community and the free thinking community here in the United States. And we used to be real active with a group called CFI, which was the Center for Inquiry. I was not raised religious. I was raised agnostic. So like I never had those problems.
I believe that's actually how it's pronounced.
My partner, however, comes from a very religious background, and he's recovering from it. So, well, he's recovered, but he's the one that introduced me to the free thinking and the skeptics community. And we just kind of hit it off there with those people. And one day we were having a discussion of, what can we do to, further free thinking and further skeptical thinking and that kind of stuff. And I'm like, well, I have archaeology. I can talk about archaeology. And at the time, the Creationist Museum was having a moment. And so a lot of the stuff that I put out early was a lot of debunking creationism and the weird things people use to support creationism, like the Ica stones and their depiction of humans and dinosaurs, and discussing the validity of C14 dating and blah, blah, blah. And it's just, so a lot of it was a lot of that early on. And then, you can only talk about one topic for so long. So it just kind of developed from there. And then Ancient Aliens started. And so that was a whole thing. And then about 5-6 years ago, we were like, we should have a podcast. So I contacted Ken Fader with the help of my then producer, Chris Webster, and we hit it off, and we had a very nice podcast for a very long time. And the podcast has also changed. Things change. So after about 5 years, it's time to rebrand. So.
Really? What are you thinking of doing with the next phase of the podcast?
I really want to focus on real world archaeology and talk to archaeologists who are doing projects that I think are cool. It's totally biased because it's up to me to decide if I think it's cool or not. But when I bring them on the show, I directly ask them questions about pseudoarchaeology and how the fringe and misconceptions affect the things that they try to teach. I also still like to pull in the monster talk and the monster people occasionally, but I mean, there's only so many times you can talk about vampires because, but because I do like the paranormal so much, I did start a side podcast called Paranormal Archaeology, where I do discuss quite heavily ghosts and possession and haunted objects and the act of paranormal, but looking at it from the aspect of how people consider something paranormal, how that affects how they interact with it. I'm not pushing the agenda that things are haunted, but I'm also not trying to debunk things being haunted, because that's not really the point. The point is to observe how people interact with objects and with places after they've considered it to be non-normal.
What do you think the interaction is between studying historical and ancient communities that have these beliefs and the continuation of the same beliefs interpreting the archaeology?
You mean studying the religious and superstitious beliefs of past cultures and...
Yeah, that trope within, that old trope within archaeology of, I don't know what it is, it must be ritual.
That's an us problem. But that's very much a... Jeb Card talks about it in his book, Spooky Archaeology, about the concept of mythic time, which is very similar to the concept of deep time. Things being so old that they've been forgotten. And so we fill those holes in ourselves, falling back on the, I don't know what it is, it must be ritual. It doesn't have to be ritual. It really could just be, could just be a thing. It could just be trash. You could just be looking at trash. We forget that people in the past are the same as people in the modern day. So we forget that objects can be mundane. And I think a lot of the problem with archaeology and, trying constantly to assign meaning to objects comes from the idea that everything must have a meaning, and that whole need to make a deeper meaning out of everything. But I mean, sometimes a cigar is a cigar, sometimes a piece of trash is a piece of trash. People broke things in the past just as much as we did, and they didn't necessarily get all worked up over it. But then there are objects that are significant that we may or may not recognize. And I fall back on the idea that we don't recognize them because they look mundane to us, or they're not as spectacular as we expect something considered supernatural or rare or special to look.
Yeah.
And so we write it off because we don't understand it. Like, how many times, and I use a lot of modern paganism to compare this, because once upon a time I tried to be pagan. I'm really bad at it, so I gave it up. But one of the things that you do in paganism is you create your own sacred objects. Like, that's the act of creating is actually one of the most important parts of paganism that I'm aware of personally. But you find things and you turn them in, you find mundane objects and you turn them into non-mundane objects, like an incense burner. Like, I have this really nice, you can't see it, but I have this really cool incense burner, Someone else might pick that up and decide that that's now the incense burner for their altar. And we may both have the exact same incense burner because it's mass produced. But mine is, I like to burn incense, and theirs is part of their ritual. It's the same kind of process, a rounded rock, a smooth round rock could be something very significant for ritual and for prehistoric religious practices, and that we would not recognize because we don't understand the significance of that rock. Where today you find a cobble in the road and you're just like, meh, and you may or may not kick it. Maybe you like round rocks and you pick it up. You don't understand why that would be significant.
Yeah.
And also it's lost to the past. So how do you recreate that?
Yeah. Because I was going to say, I'll do this now, so why not? For fear of being typecast as the guy who keeps mentioning Indiana Jones. It's very much that idea of this is the cup of a carpenter.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All the
That was a
spangy
significant
spangy.
moment, though.
Hmm?
That moment in Indiana Jones was that was the Last Crusade. Haha. See, I have watched all these movies. Um, that was a significant moment in the movie, and I don't think a lot. I want that. I want people to watch that scene because it's important. It's the big fancy cup. She chose poorly. She did. She chose the fanciest looking thing there because she figured it's the cup of Christ. It's the cup of the King of Kings. It must be fancy and ornate and spectacular. And then you forget that the historical Jesus is supposed to be a carpenter's son. He's supposed to be a common everyday man. You will notice in the movie, though, that the cup is glazed with gold on the inside.
Oh yeah, he's common but fancy.
Right, exactly. I was like, oh, it's not really that common of a cup, is it? It's still got gold glaze on the inside.
Guy's been touring for 3 years. Come on, he's going to have a rider.
He's got his pimp cup. It's fine.
Yeah. That's the
but yeah, I mean,
he's riding on the back of a donkey, but he's got a broad-brimmed purple hat.
A nice feather.
Yeah, barely mentioned. It's amazing what editing can do. Also, weirdly, the back legs of the donkey popped as he...
I should not be making these jokes, but yes, you are correct.
I did mention it earlier. It was talking about how do you think the way that academic archaeology and commercial archaeology is currently arranged, how well suited is the work that they do to combating and debunking pseudo-archaeology?
Poorly.
Right. We'll move on then. No.
Currently, we don't teach people how to talk to the public at all. The people that you see online who have managed to break into the public sphere through podcasts, through videos, through blogs, and social media. TikTok, there's an archaeology TikTok, if you didn't know. I'm desperately trying to become part of it. But hey, I'm old and I don't know how TikTok works.
Don't worry, you got no competition from me in that area.
Anyway, whole other topic, not going to go on that tangent. But we still today do not teach people how to talk to the public. And that's both, CRM people here, at least, go through the same undergraduate that academics go through. And we kind of go through the same kind of post-undergrad work that academics go through. I choose not to go after a PhD because A, I don't hate myself. And B, I honest to God don't see the value in it. But I'm not trying to be in academia. I'm a field archaeologist. I want to work in the field if I continue to do so. I don't want to leave the field. But I have never, the whole time I've ever been in school, I have never had a class on how to write for the public to read. I've never had a class on basic communication skills. I personally took Toastmasters, which is a speech club here in the States. I don't know if they have them over there.
We have them as well.
Yeah. So, I was a Toastmasters for many, many years, and that's where I learned most of my public speaking. And then I had a half semester class my freshman year in college, because it was part of the new student orientation classes that I was required to take by my college. It had nothing to do with my degree. But if it weren't for those things, I would not have ever been taught how to talk to the public, how to, conduct myself online, which you would not believe, but I do actually know how to sometimes. And then writing so that the public can read it. We write for each other. Even the CRM people, we write for each other. We write long run-on sentences and big chunky paragraphs. And we use a lot of words that are not necessary, and we try to fancy everything up, and we're trying to like make ourselves sound intelligent by using words that are unnecessary. Like, it's just silly. It's a rodent run. Everybody knows what a rodent is. You may have to explain run, but it's basically a rodent's hole. You found a rodent's hole. Just call it that. You don't need to make it sound Latin so that everybody thinks you're special. I mean, that's kind of where I'm at with it at this point. Because if I can't hand a report that's another thing that happens with pseudoarchaeology is the few reports that they are able to get a hold of, because a lot of stuff's behind paywalls or it's just not available to the average person. It's not available to me. And I am an archaeologist. But the few papers that they can get a hold of, they're so crammed full of jargon and specialized language and measurements and stuff that are not explained. And it's just, and so they read these reports and they think they understand what's going on. And then they start repeating it or trying to repeat it. And it's like a game of telephone. And it's just, it doesn't help anyone. And archaeology is a study of humanity for humanity. If we can't communicate what we're doing to people who have never gone to college, and I'm not knocking them, that doesn't mean that people aren't intelligent. It just means they don't have the same vocabulary we do. And if I can't talk to them at the same level, then I've failed. There's no freaking point for me to be doing archaeology if I can't communicate to the average person what I'm finding. Because why does anyone care?
I was going to say, what's the dangers if you can't make yourself understood?
No one gives a crap. No one's going to care. No one cares about what you do. As a CRM person, you go out in the field and you're surveying people's land to make sure, like you're going to put a road in. A road's going to go through somebody's property. And you as the archaeologist go out there to survey that particular parcel, that particular piece of property, because we work in parcels. And you get out there and you meet the landowner and you start talking to them. And everybody, of course, is like, oh, you're an archaeologist. It's like the field everybody knows about, but nobody cares about. And so then you start talking archaeology with them and they're just like, all I know is I can't develop that. I can't plow that particular chunk of my land because there's some Indian mound over there and the government told me I can't do it. Well, no, the government didn't tell you can't do that. It's also probably not an Indian mound. And B, if you do have an Indian mound on your property, you should probably have it examined so that it could be preserved. And that would actually prevent the road from going through your property, which I think is the end goal for most people. They really don't want development on their land, but since they don't understand the point of archaeology and the point of preservation, they don't understand how letting me examine that is actually going to help you. Either you're going to be able to farm that land because it's not something you have to worry about, or it's going to stop the development. People don't know that.
It doesn't always stop the development, though, does it?
It doesn't. No, it doesn't.
So how do you make that argument?
Well, honestly, I think it should stop the development, and it's one of the reasons why I've had personal problems dealing with CRM in the past. Certain projects are just doomed. But if you do even if we can't move the project or stop the project, we can still recover what's there and we can still curate what's there. So the information isn't completely lost. Like if that is an Indian mound, it does turn out to be an earthworks or a burial mound. And they decide not to reroute the road, and the road still has to go through, which means the burial mound is going to be destroyed. What has to happen then is that the company has to pay for more archaeologists to come out there and completely excavate the site. It's called rescue. And I mean, we basically go in and do a phase 3 and we take everything out. Archaeology is inherent.
Phase 3? Jargon.
Yeah. Well, hang on. Archaeology is inherently destructive. And phase 3 archaeology is what people think of when they think of archaeology. It's where you start getting the large holes that start going layer by layer down into the ground. And it does take us a while if we do it correctly. And a lot of people just don't want to pay for the manpower to have us do that, which is why they'll just reroute a lot of times. But sometimes they do. They want that to go in, and we the only option at that point is to go in and try to save the materials that are there and take it back to a museum or take it back to a lab, try to identify it, and then it also gets handed off to other people who know way more than I do. And they do the preservation and the contacting of native tribes.
Does this make archaeologists occasionally complicit in the destruction of a native people's heritage?
Funny, you should ask that. We're very complicit in the destruction of native heritage. We're the ones who started it for our various reasons. And so that's why the brunt of fixing that falls on us.
So I was going to say, how have we moved on from those Englishmen explaining why they've collected everyone else's stuff?
We haven't. We still have that argument here in the States. I wish I could give you a rosier outcome of that, but we still have issues with it. We still have lots of tribes and tribal peoples who are not happy with the way that archaeology curates and maintains the different collections that we have. They're not happy with how we can go into certain areas and just kind of dig without permission. The states recognize tribes individually, so just because you have federal recognition as a tribe does not necessarily mean that that is going to be acknowledged state to state. So whereas here in Pennsylvania, we have rules and regulations where we have to contact, I think there's 3 different recognized tribes here in Pennsylvania. In Indiana, where I'm from, we don't recognize any of the tribes, federal or otherwise. So we technically don't have to talk to anybody before we go dig, which causes problems.
How well represented are the native people within archaeology, within the profession?
There are Native archaeologists, Native American archaeologists, Indigenous archaeologists. I am acquaintances with 3 that I'm aware of, but it's the same kind of problem as any non-white archaeologist, at least here in the States. There are more white archaeologists than there are non-white archaeologists or people of color.
It's just something in the front of my mind at the moment because we had I saw a statistic for the United Kingdom is over 80% white.
Yeah, I'm sure this is similar.
Miraculously, for a country that is 80% white, we still manage to have an industry that is more white than the general public.
Yeah. I'm all for inclusivity, and I also think another reason why the field is in desperate need of change is because we really need to start encouraging more participation from people from different cultural backgrounds within the States, at least. When I say that, though, I don't want people to think that there aren't people of color and people of different ethnic backgrounds involved in archaeology here, because there are, and they're very valuable people. They're good archaeologists. They do fantastic work.
We need to spread it around a bit more.
Yeah. And it's just like, I think one of the things, the reason why I have problems saying what I say is because, like, when you say archaeology is so white, it makes people think that archaeology is white. And it kind of takes away the fact that there are people of color who do archaeology. There are Native American archaeologists. There are Black archaeologists. There are Hispanic archaeologists. There are Chinese archaeologists and Japanese American archaeologists. Like, these people exist. They do work. They are archaeologists. They are academics. They are CRM people. That percentage of people is way lower than the percentage of people that would be identified as white European. That doesn't mean, I don't want people to think they don't exist. And I feel like when I say things like the field is so white, I feel like I'm inadvertently erasing their existence. And I don't want to do that. I'd much rather be like, I know people who are not white and who are archaeologists. We may not be like best buddies and stuff, but we can work together, and I enjoy working with them. You know, that kind of stuff. I enjoy watching their presentations when they go to the SAAs and they present their work. I mean, it's fabulous. They're like every other archaeologist in the world. They're just not white.
I want to go back a sec to something you said before. You were talking about this hypothetical person who has earthworks on their land, and you're saying, you know, if you can't make yourself understood to them, it's fine. But like, what's the worst thing if someone doesn't understand archaeology? I mean,
that's kind of a difficult one too. I can take the highbrow route and be like, oh, it's a erasure of history, and we will, you know, like we must remember things and blah blah blah. But there's also the conversation that needs to be had of whose history is it, and if it's that person's history and they don't want to preserve it, do I get to step in? Should I step in? Should I just politely bow out? There's a conversation that goes around with me when I'm talking about the Confederate statues here in the States. My knee-jerk reaction is everything needs to be preserved. But preserving something doesn't mean that it has to be preserved in place. It doesn't mean that it has to be preserved as is. It doesn't mean that the statue can't be removed. But at the same time, that's part of history. That's part of American history. And I don't know if the majority of my fellow Americans are like, screw it, I don't want to remember this part, or I don't feel like this part is worth remembering.
Yeah.
Where am I as someone who, that's my job? Where am I? Because I should be at the mercy of the people for the most part, you know?
So, do you see yourself then as standing in proxy for the crowd?
Sometimes. It really depends on it. I mean, sometimes. I think we all like to pretend like we're doing something truly noble and truly lasting, and you know, we all like to think that we're changing the world with what we're doing. But I think we really need to step back. We, as archaeologists and historians, really need to step back and kind of examine what we're doing and why we're doing it and how we're doing it. Because those three things are not necessarily the same.
I think I've got a plan for the statues if you're interested. You can keep them, but they have to be used as targets on rifle ranges.
But the bullets will bounce. They're all made out of metal.
Well, that's your fault for firing at them.
That's horrible. I like it.
So you are part of, well, you've self-described as part of the internet archaeology crew. I don't think you used crew, though.
I think I said folks. I almost always say folks.
So that means you sort of put your head above the parapet to the public. How has that been? What's what kind of interactions have you had from taking these positions against pseudo-archaeology?
It's interesting because it's kind of a mixed bag. I get a lot of pushback. I will politely call it pushback from both sides. I mean, I get pushback from people who want to believe in the pseudo-archaeology, and I get pushback from people who I would think would be on my side because I am a wonderful and flawless individual. And I just like have this idea that like the field of archaeology will pull together and we are a team. But I get flack from other archaeologists pretty routinely, actually, for a variety of different reasons. And it's just a case-by-case basis. You just kind of have to deal with it as it pops up. And anytime I'm getting like true criticism, it's a time to reflect and be like, is there something valid there?
Are there any themes within that criticism that like regularly come up? Because obviously you're saying case by case, but there must be things that are more commonly.
I think the one that really entertains me the most is when I start. I don't want to drop the R word because I don't know how y'all feel about that, but I always find it entertaining when fringe people like to call me racist because I don't believe in aliens and I don't believe in a superior lost civilization. And like that one always entertains me because I'm just like,
it's hard
yes,
to like.
Right. I'm like, yes, I'm being racist because I don't believe in a great white savior race. You okay? So that one usually the first couple times that one happened, I was just like, what's happening? Now I'm kind of used to it and I expect it because it seems to be the fallback is, especially on the internet, the fallback always seems to be when you start to lose the conversation, to start ad hominem attacks on whoever's talking. And like the most powerful one to use right now is the accusations of racism. So whenever I get into an argument with people and the argument starts going south, I set a timer and I start seeing how long it's going to be before I'm suddenly a racist for some reason. So.
How much of a national psyche and therefore nationalism is supported by archaeology?
Here in the States, I think more so in the past 4 years than there has been, for obvious reasons. I think...
No, I've been in a coma for 4 years. What happened?
Do I have to talk about it?
I've got 5 minutes. I'm sure you can fit it in.
The past administration, that will hopefully be gone soon, is very much a administration of conspiracy. And conspiracy theories and conspiracy thinking is very much a part of pseudoarchaeology. So the past 4 years has been a massive overlap of very front and forward politics and the ideas that are pushed forward by pseudoarchaeology, which include racism and the use of pseudoarchaeology to justify racism, which is probably my biggest complaint about pseudoarchaeology. I mean, there's a lot of things you can go after it about, but the use of old racist ideas as modern ideas that are not supported by archaeology, but are being used by people in power to justify not preserving Native American lands, not recognizing tribal sovereignty, not preserving large chunks of the United States that need to be preserved for natural resource reasons. Pseudoarchaeology played into all of that. And I mean, I know people don't want to believe that, but it's true. Well, that's okay. I'm also used to having that conversation. So,
I've started writing articles for the Skeptic magazine.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
And the next one I've put my shoulder to is there's a knotty little problem with Stonehenge. Have you seen?
I see. I've been following the Stonehenge development. That is the tunnel a sure thing, or is it just been given
this week? You just
okay. So it is a definite go ahead.
They're going to put a tunnel under a World Heritage Site.
I'm blown away by that. I'm absolutely blown away by that.
Not the problem. It's there's a couple of far right groups have come out of the woodwork on the side of we shouldn't go ahead with this, but from a nativist kind of no one thinks of these original Brits. It's like, well, there's
you guys have some really interesting issues.
So do you.
Yeah.
But
like it's so weird to me. It's weird to me watching it, and I like watching it develop, and I'd love to have you come on and talk about it on my show maybe sometime, because it's the other side of the world, and I don't know how you guys are handling it. So
it's been like I say, I'm sort of dipping my toe into trying to be more proactively combative.
I love that you're writing for The Skeptic, though. That's fabulous. I can't wait to see it when it comes out.
What was the first article on? Yes, that's right, Ancient Aliens.
Skeptic has great. I mean, I've used them as sources for all kinds of things. I think 90% of my work on both the Nazca lines and the Koso artifact came out of Skeptic's articles.
It was the Atacama mummy that I wrote on, the little 6-inch one, and I was like, when I first started, I was like, I'll just write something about ancient aliens, and it'll be really fun, light, kind of frothy piece to get me started. And by the end of it, I was like, this is the saddest story I've ever read. And then written, and then sent in for other people to read. I'm just going to pass on the horror.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with Ancient Aliens. I tried to watch. I'm trying to watch the new season, and it's hard to do. It's really hard to do, and it always tears me up because like I really want to rally and go on about why everything in this show is wrong, but at the same time, I'm like, this really is screaming into the void. Yeah. People really aren't going to listen to this. So I've got to figure out a different way to do it.
Is combating pseudoarchaeology as entertaining as pseudoarchaeology? And can it be?
It can be. It can be. Depending on your outlook and your expectations of how effective it's going to be. I say this all the time, but you're never going to convince a true believer. So the people you're talking to are not necessarily... Well, the people you're talking to are not the people that truly believe in aliens and lost civilizations. You're talking to the people who are on the edges and who are watching from the outside and who don't know. The people who are asking questions, those are the people you're talking to. So you have to be very careful you got to be careful and balance humor and entertainment with real talk and facts, because you don't want to attack people in a way that they feel like their personal identity is being attacked, because then they're going to shut you down and they're never going to listen to you. But at the same time, you don't want to leave a lot of wiggle room and a lot of you don't want people to think they get a pass for some reason. I have not. The fight? I do sometimes. Sometimes I'll get into a fight and it's just too much and I have to back away and I have to just be like, you know what, that one's just not going to work. And it does kind of get you down. But what else am I going to do?
We've come this far. I'm going to ask a couple of last questions, but before we go into that, I just want to say thank you very much for everything we've discussed. It's been really interesting. I just want to say, do you enjoy your job?
Which one?
All of them. It sounded like you sort of like... It sounds like you fought a good fight for 5 years, and like just tonally, it sounds like you kind of... Are you feeling a little worn down at the moment?
I am. I'm not in love with archaeology as a field right now, for a variety of reasons. I still see value in trying to communicate archaeology to the greater public. In a perfect world, I would much rather spend time making videos, doing podcasts, even talking to people in person when that's finally going to be able to happen again.
2024, baby.
Seriously. I would much rather do basically the public archaeology end of archaeology than the actual research and digging side of it anymore. And like I said, that's for a variety of different reasons. Some of them are personal. Some of them are just, I'm just tired of the field. I'm just tired of the bullshit, not fun part of archaeology.
Mm-hmm. That's fair enough. But I thought I'd check.
It's a fair answer.
If it helps, I think the stuff that you are doing with the public side of things are incredible. So
thank you. I appreciate that. I really do.
No worries. Now let's ask you the fluffy questions, and
oh dear,
we'll all go and think about our what we've done with our lives.
2020 has just been a rough year. Let's just leave it at that. Let's just be like, 2020 has been a buddy. That's the answer.
Yeah. I mean, it's been. I'll say what's one of the things that comes to I'm thinking about at the moment is something we've discussed here, and I'm going to probably have it in the introduction to this one. So preface the whole interview with this sort of thing, but it's stuff like Yeah, it's feeling like you're enabling certain elements to get away with things under the auspices of, oh, but look over here, we've done some nice stuff. Look at that, look at that. And also, there's a lot of, quite rightly, a lot of discussions about decolonizing.
Yes.
Now, as a middle-class white English boy, I'm starting to think that my voice might be overrepresented.
As a lower middle class white woman, I agree. Not as a personal
that my
attack
voice
on
is overrepresented.
No, I think as someone who isn't going to shut up, let me preference that. I think there's enough white people talking.
Yeah.
I think it's good that we're talking. I think it's good that we talk about racism. I think it's good that we amplify decolonizing archaeology. I think all of that is good because there are a lot of us. We are the majority. The majority of respect and power, especially for white men, falls on your shoulders. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't continue to talk about it. However, I'm not positive what we have to say is actually relevant anymore. And I don't know how to come to terms with that. As a person, I'm not entirely sure how to come to terms with that.
Particularly as, I don't know if you feel this, it feels like it's a career that defines you as a person rather than a thing that you do. So thinking about how I go forward as an individual has been an interesting part of the year.
Yeah. No, I'm 100% there with you. That's part of the problems that I've been having with, where do I go with the show and what do I do with the rest of the social media? It's like, where's that fine line between actually helping and just being the nice white lady? Because regardless of how my ethnic background actually is, visually I pass white and I sound like a white person and I don't have problems moving through society or academia. Most people think I'm an academic. I'm not. But they just assume that I am. I mean, I can't count how many times I've been referred to as Dr. Head. But these are not assumptions people make about my coworkers who are not white. And I've seen that in the field. I've seen that kind of God, I'm so sorry. I've seen that kind of stuff happen. I don't know what to do about it.
No, but we can think about it.
And I think we should. Do I think the field is going to continue to be predominantly white for a very long time? Yes, I do. There's a lot of reasons for that. A lot of that has to do with social inequality, especially here in the States. It's just more difficult for people of color and people who are first generation and people who are lower income to get the education that's required to move up the ranks. So, I think
that feels more like that's a gatekeeping issue as well. Like, should you always have an academic background to do archaeology?
No, because I don't.
So there you go.
I do because I'm finishing up a master's degree. So yes, I have gone through the academic hoops because I had to. But I also recently started a Discord, which is a gaming social media platform. A lot of people probably know what it is. I hope you do. Anyway, we started a Discord for archaeogaming, which is the study of games and gaming through an archaeological lens. And most of the people on that Discord are archaeologists, and that was intentional because there are a lot of archaeologists who are now examining games and game worlds as real archaeology, which is a whole other conversation that I would love to have.
And if anyone wants to go back onto it, we've got Florence, who did the first episode of this year talk about archaeogaming. And
Florence is fabulous. So, yes, you should totally. But in that Discord, I do have purposely invited people who are non-academics in general and who are academics but non-archaeologists. So I've got a lot of folklorists, a lot of historians, and I've got just average everyday people. I'm not going to lie. I really value the input from those people kind of almost more than I value the input from my peers, because I love my peers and I love everybody on that Discord because they're all making it work. But I didn't make the Discord for them, and I'm not doing archaeogaming for them. And I'm doing the archaeogaming for the people who don't get archaeology, because I think it's a great way to teach and bridge. Everybody likes games. You know, we can teach archaeology by teaching it through the games. And when I have people on the Discord who are like, oh, I went and I did this thing, or I was thinking about this as an archaeological aspect, and they're not archaeologists, I'm just kind of like, oh, that's awesome. Because like they're getting into it. Like the value of it is they're beginning to see the value of thinking about history and thinking about the past. What they do with it after that, there's nothing I can do with them. But, you know, got them started.
Brilliant. Right. Sight cat or sight dog?
Cat what?
Sight cat or sight dog?
Oh, that's a hard one. I love animals.
I like it. We've talked about pseudo-archaeology, racism, representation in archaeology. What's the one that stumps you? Ooh, cat or dog?
Oh, I don't know. I can't pick. Do I have to? I'm gonna go with sight dog. Because they'll chase things. But the sight cats are pretty damn funny too. They'll dig in your unit for you and leave you presents.
Very cool. So the answer is no comment.
No, they both have merit.
Both have merit. Thanks.
They're both, yes.
And the last question. You work in the heritage industry. But
yes.
How would you like to be remembered?
Nicely. Somebody who didn't do more damage than good.
I think that's all we can hope.
Yeah, I don't care if people don't remember me after I die. I just hope that while I'm alive, I can help people out some. Even if it's just patting you on the head one day when you're having a bad day. I don't feel like I'm defined by the career I chose. I just want to be a good person.
I think that's very lovely.
I know that's lame, but there you go. That's your answer.
Far from lame. That's lovely. Thank you very much for doing the podcast.
Thank you. I enjoy coming on here.
Really interesting stuff. Is there anything you'd like to plug?
Honestly, the two things I'd really like to plug is the Women in Archaeology podcast, which has been around for a long time. I know I didn't mention it at all during the show, but...
No, I've actually got questions about it. We never got to it.
We never got to it. And the Women in Archaeology podcast... the only thing I can say is I once upon a time helped organize it. But now Chelsea, Emily, and Kirsten run the show, and I can't be more proud of them. I really can't. They do a fabulous job. People should definitely go listen to it. They really hit some hard topics. And they talk just about archaeology too. Like, that's the whole point. They're just women who talk about archaeology. So definitely go give that a listen. And my self-serving promotion would be either my the Archaeological Fantasies podcast, which still manages to get at least one episode out a month, and my growing Paranormal Archaeology blog and podcast, because who doesn't like to talk about the paranormal? So.
Amazing. Right. Thank you very much. And
I'll
see you around. Bye-bye.
Yes. Bye.
You've been listening to the Ask an Archaeologist podcast with me, Paul Garrity. The music you were listening to was by From the Ashes. Check them out on Bandcamp. It was produced by me, Paul Garrity. Follow me on Twitter at AskAnArch, or you can send an email at askanarch@gmail.com. But most importantly, if you've enjoyed yourself and you think you have a friend who might be interested in the podcast, please tell them about it. Write a review, put up a star rating, let people know that we're here. It's incredibly helpful.